The December assembly at Wormsley was already crowded when Catherine Hathstone slipped quietly through the side door with her workbox beneath one arm. She was not there to dance. She was a dressmaker's hand, and ladies of the county had brought her gowns to repair before Christmas. While musicians played in the ballroom and chandeliers glittered above silk sleeves and jeweled necklines, Catherine sat behind the ballroom doors, stitching a torn seam by candlelight. She was accustomed to being invisible. That suited her. Catherine had learned long ago that people spoke more freely around a woman they did not consider important. She heard gossip, arguments, marriage negotiations, and secrets while her needle moved steadily through cloth. That evening, however, the conversation in the ballroom changed. The Duke of Fenwood had arrived. Patrick Rashmere had inherited the title after the death of his elder brother. He was a quiet man, rarely seen at gatherings, and the county had spent months inventing explanations for his absence. Some said he was proud. Others said he was strange. Catherine thought neither. When she first saw him standing near the ballroom entrance, she noticed something different. He did not look at the dancers or the ladies. His eyes moved instead toward the doors, the windows, and the clock above the fireplace. As though he were measuring the room. As though he were looking for a way out. Later, Catherine found him alone in the supper room. She was carrying a damaged sleeve when he spoke. "Miss Hathstone." She stopped. "Your Grace." He looked at the sleeve. "Can it be repaired?" "Of course." "Will it show?" "Not if I do it properly." Patrick considered this. "And if it has been torn badly?" Catherine looked down at the silk. "Then I repair it from the inside. The outside must look as though nothing happened." The Duke gave the smallest nod. "I see." She expected him to leave. He did not. Instead, he stood beside the table while she worked. After a moment he asked, "Do you always know how to repair things?" "No, Your Grace." "What do you do when you don't?" "I find someone who does." For the first time, something almost like amusement touched his face. It disappeared quickly. Catherine returned to her stitching. Neither of them mentioned that they had just spoken for longer than Patrick Rashmere had apparently spoken to anyone in the room that night. Weeks later, Catherine was summoned to Farcourt. She went because Lady Ellen Rashmere needed clothing. The child was 9 years old and had been left in Patrick's care after the deaths of her parents. Farcourt was a beautiful house, but Catherine immediately noticed something unsettling about it. Everything was maintained. Nothing seemed alive. The servants moved quietly. Doors closed softly. Even the clocks appeared strangely absent. Lady Ellen refused to cooperate when Catherine first arrived. She would not stand for the shoemaker. She would not stand for the hairdresser. She certainly would not stand still while a stranger measured her. So Catherine did not approach her. Instead, she opened her workbox and laid out a worn ledger filled with pieces of cloth. The child came closer. "What is that?" "A book of pieces." "Why?" "Because I cannot remember 8 years of cloth in my head." Lady Ellen studied the pages. Under every piece Catherine had written 3 simple things: what the cloth had been, what it became, and who wore it. Then the child stopped. Her finger touched a small piece of deep blue silk. "That is my mother's." Catherine looked at the cloth. "Yes." Lady Ellen's voice remained very quiet. "She wore it when the painter came." Catherine listened. The child continued, remembering the gown and the day it had been worn. Catherine explained that the original sleeves had been old-fashioned, so she had altered them and made the blue silk into another dress. Catherine understood then that the Duke's silence was not indifference. It was grief. And somewhere inside the silent house, something had begun to change. The days that followed were quieter than Catherine expected. Lady Ellen had begun to trust her. She no longer stepped away when Catherine entered the nursery. She allowed her dresses to be measured, examined the pieces of cloth in Catherine's ledger, and sometimes asked questions about the women who had once worn them. But Catherine soon discovered that the house had another problem. Patrick Rashmere was expected to answer for the child. A letter from his solicitor, Mr. Starton, warned him that Mrs. Marfleet intended to challenge his guardianship of Lady Ellen. The matter would not be decided merely on paper. A gentleman from London would come to Farcourt, inspect the household, speak with the servants, observe the child, and decide whether Patrick's home appeared suitable. Patrick's legal position was strong. His appearance was not. He was unmarried. He rarely dined in company. He had withdrawn from society since his brother's death. To strangers, Farcourt looked less like a family home than a house waiting for someone to return. Patrick read the letter repeatedly. He did not answer it. One evening, Catherine found him standing alone in the hall. "Your Grace." He turned. "I need to ask you something." Catherine waited. "Would you come here tomorrow evening?" "For Lady Ellen?" "No." The answer surprised her. Patrick looked toward the great drawing room. "I want you to sit there." "Why?" "I have been told that a house must look lived in." Catherine understood. "You want me to make it look as though someone lives here?" "No." He paused. "I want to find out whether I can." The next evening Catherine arrived at 7. Patrick had arranged for her to work in the drawing room until midnight. He paid her a guinea for the 5 hours. There was nothing improper in the arrangement, yet Catherine knew exactly what Wormsley would say about it. She opened her workbox. Patrick sat across the room. For the first hour, neither spoke. Catherine stitched. Patrick read the same page of a book several times. At last he said, "Do you always work in silence?" "Only when nobody asks me anything." He looked up. "Then I shall ask." "What?" "How did you learn to sew?" Catherine told him. Her mother had taught her. Then came years of working for other women, taking old dresses apart and turning them into something new. Patrick listened. Slowly, the room became less uncomfortable. He asked about Lady Ellen's dress. Catherine told him the child had grown out of nearly everything she owned. "She has grown quickly," Patrick said. "She is 9. "I know. But you speak as though you have only just noticed." Patrick looked down. "I notice many things too late." Catherine did not answer. After a while, he began speaking about his brother. "Not everything. Only enough." His brother had been the master of Farcourt. Patrick had never expected to inherit the title. Then came the accident, and suddenly everything belonged to him. He had accepted responsibility for Lady Ellen. But he had never accepted the death. The house remained frozen around that refusal. The clocks had been stopped. Patrick had never ordered them restarted. At 11, Catherine noticed how tired he looked. At midnight, Patrick finally stood. "It is 12. "Yes." He took out his watch. Then he walked into the hall. Catherine heard a small mechanical sound. A key turning. 11 turns. Then the great hall clock began to strike. 1. 2. 3. The sound traveled through the silent house. By the final stroke, Catherine understood what Patrick had done. For 16 months, Farcourt had been held at the moment before the next hour. Now time had returned. Patrick came back to the doorway. He looked different. Not happier. Simply present. "Stay," he said. Catherine placed her needle carefully into the cloth. "Your Grace. On the 18th, when Mr. Sherard comes, sit in that chair. Bring your work. Let there be a sound in the house." She understood then. He was asking her to help him face the inquiry. But Patrick continued. "I do not want you here only for Sherard." Catherine's hands became still. "Then why?" He looked at her honestly. I do not know. That answer frightened her more than any declaration could have. Patrick admitted that he had spent 16 months feeling like a man who merely managed a property rather than lived in it. But tonight, he said, I was a man in a room. Catherine lowered her eyes. She knew what he meant. She also knew that neither of them could pretend this was merely about a guinea. Patrick stepped aside. Go home, Miss Hearthstone. Catherine gathered her workbox. But as she walked away, she heard the hall clock continue ticking behind her. For the first time, Farcourt sounded alive. The evening of Mr. Sherard's visit arrived with rain against the windows of Farcourt. Patrick sat at the head of his own table, his hands resting flat against the cloth. Mrs. Marfleet sat opposite him, composed and watchful. Mr. Sherard, the gentleman sent from London, asked his questions in a quiet voice. Patrick answered correctly. But only in a few words. He tried twice to explain what had happened to his brother, but each time the words failed him. The room grew quieter with every question. Outside, the great hall clock continued ticking. Then, shortly before 10, the door opened. Catherine Hearthstone stepped into the room. She had walked 4 miles from Wormsley through the darkness, her workbox beneath her cloak and the hem of her skirt wet from the rain. Mr. Sherard rose politely. Miss Hearthstone. My name is Catherine Hearthstone, she said. I am a dressmaker's hand at Wormsley, and I made Lady Ellen's clothes. She placed her workbox beside the chair. Patrick looked at her, but said nothing. Catherine told Mr. Sherard exactly why she had been at Farcourt. She did not disguise the arrangement or make Patrick appear more respectable than he was. He had paid her a guinea to sit in the drawing-room from 7 until midnight. Not to entertain him. Not to pretend to be his wife. Simply to sit there and work while he learned how to remain in a room with another person. Catherine explained that Patrick had been living inside his grief since his brother's death. He did not stop the clocks because he wanted the house to look strange, she said. He stopped because starting them would make his brother's death real. Mr. Sherard looked toward Patrick. Your Grace, he asked quietly, what were you waiting for? Patrick stared at the table. For it to be a mistake. No one moved. Then Patrick told the truth. He had never truly accepted that his brother was dead. He had spent 16 months managing the estate, caring for Lady Ellen, and performing the duties of a duke without ever believing that he was actually the master of Farcourt. The master of this house went into the ford at Bledlow, he said. I have only been keeping his chair warm in case there was an error. His voice remained calm, but Catherine understood how much the admission cost him. Then she opened her workbox. Inside was the marbled ledger containing years of Lady Ellen's clothing. Catherine placed it before Mrs. Marfleet and opened it to the page containing the blue silk. That is your sister's, Catherine said. Mrs. Marfleet touched the faded cloth. She read the notes beneath it and remembered how her sister had once removed her own shawl and placed it around her shoulders because the room was cold. The memory broke something inside the older woman. She wept silently. Patrick rose. He crossed the room and placed a hand on her shoulder. It was the first time anyone in that family had touched another person in 16 months. Then the door opened again. Lady Ellen entered in her nightclothes. She crossed the room without fear and placed her small hand on the blue cloth beside her aunt. Mr. Sherard watched her. He wrote nothing. He understood. The petition was never tried. Mrs. Marfleet withdrew it, agreeing that Lady Ellen would spend part of each year in Bristol and receive a proper letter from Farcourt every week. Patrick accepted the arrangement even though it hurt him. Catherine saw that he did not pretend otherwise. Months later, Patrick came to Wormsley. This time he did not summon Catherine to the churchyard or ask her to meet him in public. He walked into the dressmaker's shop, removed his hat, and stood among the bolts of calico like an ordinary man. The child stays, he said. The aunt is satisfied. Then he paused. There is nothing legal left to settle. Catherine looked up. Patrick swallowed. Will you marry me? She studied him. Give me the reason. Patrick answered simply. Because I have been a man in a room with you. He told her that she was the only person who had ever made him feel that he could live inside his own house again. Catherine looked down at the cloth in her hands. Then she smiled. Yes. They married in April at Bledlow. Catherine made her own wedding gown from new cloth chosen by Lady Ellen. She refused to marry in something repaired or remade. And Farcourt changed with them. The clocks were wound every Sunday. Lady Ellen eventually learned to wind the hall clock herself. On winter evenings, candles appeared in the windows, and Catherine sat beside the fire with her work. The great house was no longer silent. It had become a home. And whenever the clock struck the hour, Patrick no longer waited for the past to return. He simply listened to the sound of time moving forward.